Our world is lost in unnecessary fear and hurt. Our systems seem scientifically engineered to make you small, powerless, and always waiting for the next great leader who will fix the problems around us. Worse, we're witnessing neighbor versus neighbor while warfare breaks out around our family tables. But you have access to a spirit, a strength that enlarges and empowers you. Even better, you don't need to wait for the next big movement. You can heal the world. It's time for governance by grace. Welcome to Gracearchy with Jim Babka.
We talked about watching the Nazis marching by and inviting them up to the porch for lemonade. You know, it's like that aspect of grace.
Yeah, and asking them, what's your deal?
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't mean that you accepted what it was that they're doing, or you condone it, or you're endorsing it in any way. It doesn't mean that. It means that you're acknowledging the humanity of that person, and you want to know what brought them to the place that they're at. It's the reverse of shame, right? I'm acknowledging who they are as a person, and I'm not going to spend my time in judgment of them. I want them to tell me what's going on. I have a role model in this, and that's Daryl Davis, who has 23 or 6, I don't remember the exact number, Ku Klux Klan robes hanging in his closet. He is a black jazz musician keyboard player, used to play with Chuck Berry, and he has befriended Klans people. He's been doing this for 30, 40 years. He sits and talks to them because they come to the clubs and they like jazz or whatever. They watch the show, and he gets to meet these people afterwards. And then he sits down and talks to them and finds out that they're racists, right? But inevitably, after they've gotten to know him a little bit, he'll say, somehow the conversation about racism will come up, and they'll say, but you're different. And what's different about him? The thing that's different about him is he's made contact with them. He's spoken to them. He's acknowledged their humanity at that moment, and he hasn't acted in judgment. Now, he talks of taking, one couple to the Smithsonian Museum on African American history. He talks about, telling them flat out, you realize you don't make any sense right now. I'm still just as black as everybody you're criticizing. He doesn't shy away from the truth when it's time to express it, but he just relates to them in general, and even engages in acts of kindness. So he had a situation, Dave, where there was a Klans member who got sent to prison, and all of the rest of the people in the Klan kind of abandoned this mother and daughter that were left, without a husband and father as a result of this. And it was like a 3-4 hour drive to get to prison. And so more than once he picked her up and he drove her to meet her husband at the prison, and then drove she and her daughter back home. And the daughter and the mother both renounced, and they said it was because of this act of kindness that he had done them. So that's the kind of power under that I think is being offered here. It is completely subversive, and it should tackle any system that advocates violence to achieve its ends. Any system that says that envy and escalation are the ways of getting things done. It should undermine all of that. It doesn't mean it's going to be easy, because I kind of get a chuckle because I like to talk about grace, and then there are these people that show up. You've addressed a couple of your critics, people who show up and say, "Oh, this is a free grace." How does that work? Grace is a challenge. Grace is difficult. Grace is not easy. That's what makes it so scandalous. And so that's what I see here as the kingdom under, is that ability to kind of come in and subvert it all with grace, with love.
Mm-hmm. We've been wanting to talk about, and this might be the good point for it, we've been wanting to talk about Trinity. And I come to this with a very different understanding of Trinity than you guys probably do. But I think this might be a good point, because we're talking about the operational aspect of grace, which for me is like the Holy Spirit in action. So can we sort of segue with the power of love now into the Trinity and see where that takes us?
So I was going to give you a list of questions, but we're not doing that. We went off in a completely different way.
Okay.
And I'm glad we did. I think if you're talking about Trinity, you're talking about the most profound, perhaps, metaphysical idea. This is the origin of everything. There's a relationship of 3 individual persons person, and I mean that in the personhood sense, but not Homo sapien, 3 persons who are interacting with one another in a constant move. Each of them maintains their individuality, but they are completely unified. There's complete harmony there. They're of the same substance. They're all God. They're all part of God. They're all of God. They have that deity, but they also have this harmony that makes that in terms of their intent and their action and the lack of malice and stuff that we experience in our normal relationships. And it's from this relationship that we all derive. This is the fundamental, to me, the fundamental basis of everything. And it drives a lot, even though we don't talk about it every episode we do. It drives an awful lot of what I'm trying to do here with Gracearchy.
So why is Trinity important? I mean, why is it an important concept? What is it that we end up keep coming back to this Trinitarian?
Why do we need it?
Why do we need it? I suppose the Jews were fiercely monotheistic. They saw God as one, and they would fiercely defend anything that would chip away at that oneness of God. So you have these Jewish followers of Jesus. By the time Pentecost rolls around, they have now experienced God as one, as they understand God as the King of the universe, the Creator. Now they've experienced God as Jesus, a friend who walked in their midst and was physical. And now they've experienced him as this empowering spirit. So what do you do with that? What do you do with that now that you've experienced God in these 3 distinct ways in your life, and yet you are fiercely monotheistic? And this is kind of the rub. What do we do with that? Why is that important? How does that empower our experience? How does that empower the effect of living God's love? And of course, there's been all these different ideas of how you understand the Trinity. But the truth of the matter is that we can't understand the nature of the Godhead fully. There's no way that we'll be able to fit that into finite minds and put it into language. And as soon as we've done that, we've already stepped away from it, from the actual reality of it. But we try as much as we can to try to picture.
So wait, there's like an observer effect.
Absolutely. Yeah, but the truth of the matter is, if you're talking about something that stands outside of space and time, stands outside of logic and physics, how in the world do you think that a language or a mind is going to be able to apprehend that? There's no way to do it. And so truthfully, all our theology is just a construct, because we can't know for certain what these spiritual realities are, but we can become convinced of them as we live them out of experience. And I see that essentially as what the first followers of Jesus did. They lived this reality of these 3 different experiences, aspects of God, persons of God. And then, 3 centuries later, they had to come up with a way of codifying that. How do we put that down? Because it was tearing the church apart. We've got to come to a solution. And they came to a solution, a sort of political solution. It was an intellectual solution. It didn't satisfy anybody really at the time, but it was something to go on. I think the Eastern Fathers, the Cappadocian Fathers, had probably the best understanding of it when they called it the Perichoresis.
Yes.
Which was circle dance.
Yes.
That idea of those dancers that in their spinning, that there's a motion blur, that they look like one solid object as they spin, and they continue to spin.
So the perichoresis goes even further than that, because there's also, if you look very closely to origin of that word and study that word, there's an interpenetration as well right there. You said the picture kind of blurs, but even the space between them blurs. There is such harmony of motion. So it's interesting, because I look back to some of the things we were taught to do is not to dance. This is right. This is literally what God is doing there. The picture that we're being given is that inside that relationship, they're not static. They're not still. I love the fact that, in the ministry that you've got, you were beginning to try to bring back some of this Eastern side, because where the West proceeded to go from here with Augustine and Aquinas and on was that they connected to Aristotelian ideas of who God is, where God was the other. He was unapproachable. He was so far beyond what is our present reality that we couldn't possibly be there. And maybe the only way you could do it is if you were wealthy enough that if you could just sit all day and contemplate the greatest of it, you would begin to be able to be aware of it. But even then, he would be impervious to you. There is definite separation when we start to see where separation shows up within Christianity itself. It's very, very evident. Most people's gospel is the gospel of hell. It's not gospel, it's bad news. So we see that that's kind of happening. But this periparetic notion that there was a dynamism in God, there's a relationship. And I would even go so far as to argue that there's a space that starts to open up inside that we are invited directly into. We're being drawn into that space to be part of. what it is that God is and what God's doing.
Part of the dance.
Part of the dance. Yes.
We have to be part of the dance. See if this helps. The word for spirit in Hebrew is ruach. In Aramaic, it's ruha. It means spirit, breath, and wind all at the same time. And Eastern words have that, that capability of carrying all these different concepts at the same time. But think about what holds those three concepts together. It's motion. Wind is only wind if it's moving. Otherwise, it's just air, right? Breath is only breath if it's moving. Otherwise, you're dead. And spirit is only spirit if it's moving. It has to be moving. Why do you seek the living among the dead? The angels ask the women when they come. You're not going to find it here in a static place. You're not going to find it in a static idea in your mind. As soon as you conceive of God or conceive of Trinity, you've taken a snapshot. It's now static in your mind. The reality has moved on, and you're sitting there looking at the after image of it all. But it's static. It's dead. It's not among the living anymore. To me, the beautiful animating idea of Trinity is that you are entering into the motion of God. Love implies a beloved. It has to have an object. There is emotion that's implied in that. If it's static, it's no longer love. It's no longer spirit. So it's no longer God.
That turns this. So this is a revolutionary concept because God specifically says, or Jesus says, that God's love. God is love. Not God loves love. We've talked about this before. Not God loves love. Not God's the best lover. Not God thinks love's groovy. No, God equals love. That if you want to understand God, you got to understand love, and love has a beloved, right? And so that's part of that whole dance. And so as we start to understand that should lead to grace right there. Just all that thought all by itself, if you believe that, should revolutionize your thinking. If that's the source, and that source is relationship, and that relationship's defined by love, by that level of just complete harmony, then what does that mean? What are the as above, so below? What does that mean here in the here and now?
Plus, what does it mean in motion? Because if we're all about presence and the present moment, it's gone, right? But if we're about the present journey, it implies the motion of love or the motion of grace, so the involvement in the Trinity, right? Jumping on the merry-go-round.
And in essence, and this will be right up your alley, love is like music. It exists as long as it's vibrating in the air, and then it doesn't exist anymore. And it's the same thing with love, with spirit. All these motion-driven characteristics of God and of ourselves as well, they have to be in motion. And then I suppose you could ask the question, well, what is love? And I go to Thomas Merton for this because I thought he had the most brilliant definition. Love isn't a feeling. Feelings are ephemeral. They come and go. Love really isn't behavior that we would describe as loving, because there could be all sorts of reasons that can be self-aggrandizing for doing loving things to other people. But Thomas Merton said, what love is identification with the beloved. It is that connection where you end and they begin becomes blurred, and you become that one thing in motion again.
Well, and then literally in the act of marriage, two people come together and that line is blurred, right? There is an extreme connection at that point. And that, to me, that's a notion that begins to touch the face of God. I mean, you were so joined to another human being at that moment that you have some sense of what it must like to be in the sacred dance.
I'm going to go one more on that, because we did an episode, 2-3 ago now, taking on the notion that sex is not sacred if it's not done for procreative reasons. But that is sex. The sex act is the motion of love in this sense.
Yes. It should be something that draws us into connection. It has a rarefied position. It's not something that we should be playing with willy-nilly. This is a tremendous gift we've been given.
Yeah.
But we are being given an opportunity, and we're being given an opportunity. The creation aspect of that springs out of that, because there was that connection, therefore creation, not creation, therefore we could do this thing.
Right. There you go.
But I also think it's important, if we're looking at marriage or looking at sex as these, because they are complete representations, I think, of God in a Trinitarian
Sacraments,
sort of
we
sense.
could call them.
And I think that's where we want to go.
That's
we want to think
go.
of them as a sacrament. But what's a sacrament? Well, a sacrament is an outward expression of an inward transformation. Yeah. The sacrament isn't holy in and of itself, not intrinsically. It's just a ritual. It's just a thing. Sex is an act, physical act. Marriage is a social contract. They become sanctified when we bring to them that sense of connection, that sense of the motion of love in them.
The sense of the Trinity, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because it's too facile sometimes to think of them as having their own properties. And then we move into a superstitious place where this thing itself has this
Right.
power.
This act has an intrinsic power to it that is somehow separate from that, even though it reflects that in some way.
But just like kingdom, it moves from the inside out.
Yeah, has
It's
to.
we who sanctify the act.
Yeah.
As we bring ourselves and our presence to it.
So if we choose not to sanctify the act, is that sin?
Yeah.
Okay, so I just want to tie that up.
You could say
no,
it that
you
way.
in fact, you could even use sex in very cruel and degrading ways, right?
Absolutely,
you can use
right.
it in ways that actually dehumanize and disconnect and hurt and harm. And to some degree, this has been glorified in a lot of different ways. Although I do think the culture is starting to come to grips with the fact that this has happened, and there's people now in surprising places beginning to ask questions about the way that the last 50, 60 years have gone in our American culture, about whether or not that was the right way to go. I don't, most of the people that I see publicly talking about sex, I wish they would shut up because they're not doing it right. But I think we're beginning to scratch on something really important here, and that the thing that increases connection and bond between human beings is there's when you're married, you're also going to experience those times when you have division with your spouse, where you have disagreement. Okay, so something has happened that has begun to push that thing apart. Now, that may not necessarily, in my humble opinion, you can correct me if you think I'm wrong, that may not necessarily be sin. It just may be that there's a difference, and something's got to be worked out.
The what is in conflict, but the how is still there.
If the intent is to get back together, if the intent is like, wait a minute, I've noticed that now a separation has occurred. Mm-hmm. Now I want to do something to fix that. If that is the intent of the couple, and then we are even in this case, sex then turns, and we mentioned this in the previous episode, sex then becomes the gift for restoration. It's part of that healing process between a married couple. So it has tremendous restorative power. So we're getting a chance to touch the face of God and be restored at the same time.
This is an interesting thing because it's the same how that restores relationship in skin color differences or in political differences, it's the same how.
100%. Because the proxy here that we would put in place, the sacrament we would offer here, is empathy.
Yeah.
And it turns out we're hardwired for empathy. We're hardwired for that connection. So go back to the Daryl Davis discussion.
Just thinking of that. Yeah.
So Daryl Davis goes and he talks to people in the clan, and he gets them to hang up their robes in the closet, right? But he has this discussion that he's going through that, okay, I'm black, and people say to him, well, you're different. Well, what's different about him is that he connected. He's connecting now. He's a real human being. He's not an abstraction anymore that can be hated. And so even there, the handshakes and the gesture, the smiles that we offer one another, right from the time an infant comes out, they learn very quickly to imprint on their mother's face while they're feeding. And it turns out that right to this very day, aside from sex, that the thing that lights your brain up the most and that causes the most brain activity is another person's face, because you're reading and judging. You're checking out all the micro expressions that are going on there to find out, are they angry? Are they a threat? Are they good? Are they bad? Do they like me? Did they think what I said was funny? You're testing and figuring that stuff out at all times. That's that connection. And we saw, if I could just go one step further, we saw during this recent pandemic that separating people, putting people, walling them off in their homes, that we've seen increases in depression. We've seen increases in slipbacks into addiction or increase in addiction. There's been a number of different side effects, particularly with our younger people, that have occurred, because that connection is something that we require.
We need it.
But it is the path towards healing. If you can put two people together, even if one has victimized the other, it's just stunning how often these kind of things can lead to restoration and healing because of that connection, because of that empathy.
Let me ask my pastor friend this question. So in conflict, then, what is the way forward? Forget whatever the conflict. It might be huge, it might be personal, but what in conflict is the way forward with all of what we've talked about here to restore kingdom?
The first thing to realize is that you can be in conflict and be sinless at the same time. That the two do not equate. All right. It's okay to have
Because sin,
intellectual
define
differences.
sin again.
Because sin is a state of separation.
Yep.
But
Okay.
that's not about separation intellectually. We can have different ideas. That's great. My wife and I have very different ideas, but we have a good marriage because we're willing to move beyond those and stay connected at that heart level. And so I think the first thing is to realize that we do not have to get to a place of agreement intellectually in order to resolve this conflict. That's not the goal here. The goal here is to see beyond the conflict and to be able to celebrate our common humanity and to retain the same level of respect and civility and caring for each other and respect for the other's ideas, even if we continue to disagree with them. So that would be, I think, a prerequisite to being able to handle a conflict, is to make that distinction. But I think ultimately it's to have the skill to be able to step outside your own egoic consciousness, I guess, for the lack of a better way of putting it, to step into that liminal space, into that doorway, onto that threshold.
So to set aside what I want for a moment.
Even I want, but I think more deeply, it's what I identify with.
Yeah. So you have to be willing to be to be existentially vulnerable. There we go. There's some $25 words.
There you go.
But put it all aside and say, Dave, I'm here.
Are you willing to drop those defenses? Are you willing to drop the certainty of your position long enough to be able to really let the other person in and hear what they have to say and entertain their point of view?
And that's Daryl Davis.
That's what he did.
Yeah.
I mean, that's exactly what
That's
he
his
did,
practice.
you know. And so that doesn't mean that as you entertain someone else's opinion that you're going to ultimately agree with it or have it become a basis for your own life and informing your choices. But you have connected with that other person and you've forged a relationship. It's amazing what will come of that over time. Affection can come over that over time, and a merging of ideas. I mean, my wife and I are so much more in line now than we were when we started, but we're still worlds apart.
You know, I have a friend who listens to every single one of these podcasts, so he'll know who he is as soon as I start talking about this right now, who spends a lot of time at diners and writing about diners. And one of the things, he's actually endorsed this show, not from a perspective of a believer. He sees this connection that occurs inside diners. It's exactly what you just described. The people all bring in their individuality and their characters. There's regulars at these places. It's kind of like Cheers. Everybody knows your name.
Yeah.
And when they come in, they still are the same people. So like there might be two guys that have been having the same ongoing political debate for the last, 10 years, sitting on their stools in that diner. They're part of the character of that diner. And what you can say about both of them, they keep coming back, right? They like each other. They kind of enjoy that banter. And there wasn't intellectual disagreement, obviously. It was different. Right. I have another friend in my life who I think likes to stir the pot a little bit just to see what's going to happen. Like, can he get everybody kind of, like, if I say this, what are they going to do? Like that kind of interest. But he has this curiosity and interest in people and wanting to see how they, what makes them tick and so forth. The intellectual agreement wasn't required. In fact, it would have been a negative in both of these situations. And yet there's some kind of bond there. Right.
Absolutely. What would be more boring than for everyone to be in agreement? I mean, we don't learn anything if everybody's in agreement. I've often told groups that I'm talking to, if you're all agreeing with me, then I'm the only one who's thinking in this room. I'm hoping that this is stirring something in you and you're coming up with your yeah buts and your rebuttals and your devil's advocacy, because that's where that Socratic method takes place. And that's where we really learn. And that's where life gets interesting.
Yeah. All right. So let's go back inside the Trinity then. Let's see if we can bring this all kind of full circle. The Cappadocian fathers and, kind of the whole council setting where they come up in Nicaea with these plans and they capped them off. I can't remember the second council where they kind of kind of fine tune that stuff. Where they get to that point, they identify that there is what we call Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. They're in this dance. What's their roles? How do you see like the experiences that you're having with God and that are coming about in, you say, 3 different ways?
What were the roles from the church fathers' point of view or my personal point of view?
Well, let's start with the church fathers' point of view. And
Okay.
then and then we'll build to the other.
The church father's point of view was the Father was God in terms of creation and being first cause. The Son was God in the sense of being the agency and working toward the connection of all people. The Spirit was the sanctification, and so there was kind of that breakdown of the roles of the three. I suppose for me personally, I don't really make a big distinction between the three. More and more, I see them as one. And in my prayer life and in the way that I conceive of this power that's greater than myself. And so I'm not thinking so much Trinitarianly, but I still recognize that I'm experiencing God in those three basic ways. There is still the God that undergirds this creation that we're occupying, that keeps the glue that holds everything together. I see Christ in the faces of you two right now and everybody that I connect with. And I realize that God inhabits these relationships, these human relationships, that ineffable quality. What is it that is really at the root of the silence of my centering prayer or my contemplative time? There's something there. I'm never really alone. And even when I get to that place where I'm hitting the ground zero level of my own consciousness, that there's still something there. And to me, that's spirit. And so there is that experience in day-to-day activity of the threeness of God. And yet I don't tend to think intellectually in that way as much anymore.
So
I think that's a fine answer.
you got that? I'm still like, I'm there. So even though these aspects of the Trinity are part of the dance, it's not like you're going to the Father for this and to the Son for that and to the Holy Spirit for something else. It's all in that, in one.
Absolutely.
But you still feel an effect that you might consider to be ineffable, a numinous coming from the Spirit, a more operational perhaps coming from the Son, and then a creative effect coming from Father.
I think that's a good way to paraphrase. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I like that. I would like to thicken the soup a little bit.
Go for it.
There we go. Jim Babka, Gracearchy, soup thickener.
Professional soup thickener.
We can see it on kitchen shelves nationwide. Never mind.
So John 1 starts off in a very different place than the other Gospels start off. It's radically different.
Yeah.
And it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And it builds up a case that the true source of everything is actually Christ. He's the one that in whom we live and move and have our being. He's the one that brought all this together. And he had a goal, a mission to bring us to the Father. So there's literally a description of like, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. He's come to bring us. He's portrayed in the later part of the New Testament as being like the big brother, right? Who brought us to the home and we were adopted into the same family with that parental figure. I also cannot help noticing that two things. First, it says that when a society in the Old Testament, you probably know the verse off the top of your head, but when there'll be a heart that turns back towards the fathers and fathers to their children, there'll be that connection. It seems to me that an evident sign of social decay and disharmony is where there is that father, the father and the son become rivals. There's separation between the father and the children. And we've spent time talking on our show even about the effects, the ravages that have occurred as a result of the war on drugs, which held fathers directly at homes, deposited them in prisons. They have replaced that role of the father with the welfare system that's basically sucked this role model out and see what happens in these settings, in these situations. We know that lack of a father, that is a huge predictor of poverty, a huge predictor of a whole bunch of social ills. And then we're not allowed to talk of it. It's politically incorrect to speak of. Is there a reason that God is portrayed as father? Now, I'm not married to this in kind of gender type of sense. I happen to be a fan of the book called The Shack, where the father in that particular person's case needed a mothering instinct, and God was there to provide that too. So I think there's a parent role, but I think it's interesting that the role that's presented, I don't think it's strictly that case that this is some kind of ancient patriarchal imposition upon us as a culture, that there is actually an important role for fathers and mothers in homes with their children in terms of like, and this being kind of a building block for society. And then Jesus is resurrected. Like the work is done. He said it is finished. And then he left, and he left us with this helper who you talked about, kind of that presence. When I think of the presence, I usually think of the Holy Spirit, because what they're there to do is to be that quiet whisper. What they're there to do is to remind me what the Spirit is, and I think of the Spirit in the feminine sense. So that's where I locate the feminine God, the Sophia, the Spirit of wisdom is there to help me with the how that you were speaking of earlier. To me, it's no accident that we have these words for wisdom in the Old Testament, whether they're Hebrew or they're Greek, that have a feminine side to them, that we are being given this how, and that how is always telling us it's in Christ. It's in Christ. Keep going back to Christ, who, by the way, wants to show us to the Father. So maybe I got a little too intellectualizing there, but these are some of the things that I think about.
Well, I hear you breaking it. That's like more granular for me. As I listen to Jim talk about this, there's a very specific, we're going to use the word like motion between the three parts of the Trinity. Would that be a fair way of saying it?
I'm okay with that for right now.
Yeah.
I don't know what the implications of it are, but for right now,
yeah.
I'm
Well, like,
okay with it.
Like the Son is leading us to the Father.
Yes.
Right. So which kind of means that we're all
and the
brothers.
Spirit seems to be leading us to the Son.
And yes. So it's like this, can you see the circle happening?
Right.
Right.
But then God turns around and said, "This is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased."
Right.
Right. My faith, the stuff that happens in that Holy Week, as they call it, this is a story that, all of the Old Testament seems, to my mind, to be pointing to, and all the New Testament seems to be pointing back at. And this one human, which is, by the way, another important aspect of the Trinity, is that only one of them came and fully identified and was flesh like we are, and had that full range of experience, and then offered themselves up as sacrifice. They, says that Christ took a lower station, right? He accepted this position of being human, gave up the form of God in order to do this. That these are all aspects of like trying to experience all the different things that are happening, and our best ability to explain it is this Father, Son, Spirit, perichoretic model.
By the way, Dave, can we link in? Is it the Good Friday where you do the Passion Play?
Mm-hmm.
I want to make sure that people have a way of being able to get that, because it's an amazing production, but it also goes directly to what Jim's talking about right now in such a beautiful way. So I'll make sure that gets into the show notes. But I'm stepping all over your response.
It's I agree with 98% of what he just said.
There we go.
No, remember that way. Gospel of John is all about the identity of Jesus. I mean, that's really the overarching thing that starts right in John 1:1. And so he's establishing the identity of Jesus because it's so important for us. If we don't see that Jesus is the avatar of the Father, if you will, that Jesus is the Father in human form and represents everything that the Father is, then how are we going to go any further forward? If we don't understand that God is here and now, he's not away someplace, but here and now, and that this idea of kingdom begins from the inside out, and we can see what it looks like in human form, we really don't get to go any further. On the other hand, we need to graduate that as well. Why did Jesus say it's to your advantage that I go? They were kicking and screaming. I mean, you can't leave us. I mean, here we are. But it's to your advantage that I go. Why didn't Moses get to go into the promised land? Why did he have to die at the top of Mount Nebo? Because the people had imprinted on Moses, and they were looking to him for their salvation and no longer looking through him to their own relationship with God
this is
directly.
dangerous territory here. So you're suggesting that some of us are imprinted on Jesus?
Absolutely. His first followers they knew him as a friend. They were clinging to his coattails. They weren't exercising their own empowerment.
No, I mean, who wouldn't? Son of God, the whole thing, right?
It's natural for us to do that. We do that now as we follow podcasters and gurus and all the things that we follow.
Well, other podcasts.
Other podcasts. Right. Yeah.
But the point here is Jesus is making is that I have to go, because then the helper would come. Does that mean the helper wasn't there until after he was crucified? Of course not. The helper was always here as much as the helper's ever been.
But they weren't aware.
Here, but they weren't aware.
They didn't get it.
That's the point. They couldn't see beyond Jesus, and they couldn't see beyond who they knew as physical Jesus. We sometimes here now cannot see beyond our conception of Jesus. We're hanging on to that and clinging on to that. And anything that we cling on to mentally becomes our limitation. We can't get any further than that. If we aren't willing to jettison all that, just as Jesus jettisoned everything that it meant to be God, however it was before he was incarnated, in order to be with us, we can't also be with anybody else or anything else until we let go of all of that. It's really important for us to understand that there's a gap between the resurrection and Pentecost. You know, Pentecost represents the moment, the point at which the people were fully empowered by direct connection with God. And that wasn't just 50 days. I guarantee you that was a significant amount of time. And you see the evolution of that happening by the clues that are left in the Gospels, and especially John. And so they don't recognize him when they first see him in risen state. It takes some time for them to be able to realize the intimacy that connection remains. And there's some time after that as they go through before they're fully empowered. That's going to be the experience of every one of us. It's what Jesus and Nicodemus says, yeah, you're born of water, but now you got to be born of spirit. And he can't conceive of that because he's still looking for certainty. He's still looking for clarity. That's what he desires. And Jesus says, hey, it's like the wind. You know where it's coming from. You don't know where it's going. You can't see it. When you can abandon yourself to that notion and not be concerned about certainty, but learn to live in.